When three grown men humiliated a struggling mother in public, nobody said a word, until an MMA fighter in a hoodie decided silence wasn't an option. Trevon Miles didn't want to be seen that afternoon. Not by fans, not by trainers, not by anyone. He was running on fumes, mentally and physically, after 5 straight days of sparring sessions and media pressure. UFC scouts had been sniffing around, and his coach kept reminding him, "One wrong move, Trey, and it's back to regional cards." So he kept his head down, hoodie up, and drove across town to a place where no one knew his name. Save More on Fremont Street in Stockton, California. He wasn't there for a full cart. Just eggs, oatmeal, almond milk, and some muscle recovery drinks. Nothing special. He barely made eye contact with the cashier when he walked in. His earbuds weren't even playing music. He just wore them so no one would try to chat. All he wanted was a quiet exit. The place was practically empty, which suited him fine. 2 teenage boys arguing over frozen pizza, a few older folks looking at produce, and a crying baby somewhere in the distance. Trevon moved like a ghost, sticking to the perimeter, head low, gym bag slung over one shoulder. It wasn't until he got near the self-checkout area that his pace slowed. There was a sound that wasn't just noise. It was tone. Sarcasm, layered with cruelty, loud enough to draw attention, but just shy of being considered harassment. Just loud enough to make the victim feel trapped without help. A woman, mid to late 20s, brown ponytail, grey hoodie with a bleach stain on the sleeve, stood at the counter with a toddler balanced on her hip. She was trying to scan a pack of diapers and a box of cereal. Her little boy was maybe 2 or 3, wide-eyed, resting his head on her shoulder. And behind her were 3 grown men, laughing. One of them, thick-build, buzz-cut, cargo shorts in March. He held up a can of beans and tossed it into his cart like he was playing a game. "Look, I'm doing it too. Hey lady, think they'll give me extra stamps if I wink at the cashier?" Another chimed in, pretending to be offended. "Come on, give her a break, bro. She's just teaching her kid how to hustle early. Respect the grind." They all cracked up. The cashier's eyes darted toward them, but she didn't say a word. The rest of the store acted like it wasn't happening. Trevon stopped walking, right near the end of the frozen food aisle, just past the energy drinks. He turned his head slightly, just enough to see it all from the side. The mum wasn't yelling back. She wasn't defending herself. She just kept her head low, fumbling through her wallet, whispering something to her son, maybe to keep him calm. Her hands were shaking. Trevon had been raised by a woman like her, a woman who never had the luxury of fighting back in public, a woman who swallowed her pride more times than she should have had to, just to keep her kids fed and the lights on. He stood there for a moment, stuck between 2 instincts. Get what he came for, and leave quietly. Or say something. He looked down at his hoodie, damp from training, and his calloused knuckles. This wasn't a ring. There were no gloves, no ref, no crowd, but the line had already been crossed. The third man made a noise with his mouth, a loud kissing sound, directed toward the mom. "Hey, sweetheart, swipe that card twice, one for the kid, one for me." Trevon exhaled through his nose. He turned left. He let his bag drop to the floor behind a refrigerated bin and walked with quiet, deliberate steps toward the scene. No one saw him coming. Not yet. But something didn't sit right as he turned the corner near the frozen section. The mom didn't even flinch anymore. You could tell this wasn't the first time. Not today. Maybe not even this week. She moved like someone who'd learned how to stay small when things got loud. She reached for her debit card again with shaky fingers, her son still clinging to her neck, eyes wide and confused. Trevon stopped a few feet behind the group of men. Close enough to hear everything. Close enough that they should have noticed him, but they didn't. Not yet. The one with the buzz cut leaned closer to the mom's cart, poking at a loaf of bread. "Look at all this organic stuff. Guess the government's got taste now." That's when Trevon spoke. Back up. Just 2 words. Calm, low, controlled. The men turned slowly, expecting some old man or a timid shopper. They weren't ready for Trevon Miles. He stood with his arms relaxed, one hand still in the pocket of his hoodie, eyes locked on the guy in the front. Not angry. Not smiling either. Just there, in that way that made it clear he wasn't going anywhere. Cargo shorts. Guy raised his eyebrows. You talking to us? I said back up, Trevon repeated. Let her pay in peace. The mom looked up for the first time, surprised. She blinked like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to say something or stay silent. The man closest to her gave a scoffing laugh. Mind your business, bro. Trevon took one step forward. Still calm. Still quiet. My business is watching 3 men act like high school punks around a mom trying to buy food for her kid. So yeah, this is my business now. For a second, no one moved. The third guy, the one who made the kissing noise, shifted awkwardly, glancing toward the registers. Man, he's just trying to flex. Come on. But Cargo Shorts wasn't backing down. His pride wouldn't let him. He puffed his chest a little and stepped up. Look, man, I don't know who you think you are, but nobody's scared of a gym rat in sweats. Trevon didn't blink. Good. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to stop you. The store had gone oddly quiet. The older couple at checkout stopped mid-scan. The teen boys who'd been arguing over pizza were frozen by the candy aisle, watching like it was a pay-per-view event. One of them even pulled out his phone. Cargo Shorts guy glanced at the phone, then back at Trevon. That's when it clicked. He was being recorded now. The pressure shifted. He didn't want to look weak, not in front of his friends, not online. So he did what people like him always do when they're embarrassed. He escalated. He shoved Trevon. Hard. It wasn't clean. It wasn't even well-timed. Just a stiff, angry push to the chest, meant to say back off. But Trevon didn't move. He didn't stumble. He absorbed it like someone who's been hit by far worse. For half a second he said nothing. Just stared at the man's hands, like he was calculating. Then Trevon's hand came up, not to punch, but to grab the guy's wrist, twist, and lock his arm. A second later, he dropped him to one knee with a clean, effortless shoulder turn that left the man grunting in pain but not seriously hurt. Trevon leaned in close to him and said, just loud enough to be heard, I could end this in 3 seconds, but I'm not here for that. He let go and stepped back. Leave. All 3 of you. The other 2 weren't brave anymore. They grabbed their friend by the shoulders and started pulling him away, muttering curses under their breath. The phones were still up. The whispers had turned into full-blown commentary. Trevon didn't care. The mom stood frozen, still holding her son. Trevon turned toward her, softened his tone, and said, You okay? She nodded slowly, tears welling up but refusing to fall. Her son hid his face in her neck. You don't have to thank me, Trevon added. Just finish paying. Go home safe. But silence was about to be broken by something much more powerful. By now, at least 5 phones were recording. You could hear faint murmurs from shoppers narrating what just happened like they were watching a live stream. One guy whispered, Dude just folded him like laundry, while another kept repeating, I got the whole thing. I got the whole thing. But Trevon wasn't watching the crowd. His eyes were still on the mom. Alyssa, he'd soon learn. And the little boy pressed into her shoulder. She didn't know whether to finish checking out or leave everything behind and just run. Her hands hovered awkwardly near the card reader, stuck in that dazed space where adrenaline collides with disbelief. The cashier finally spoke. It's okay, Mom. You can go ahead. No one's going to bother you now. Alyssa looked around, like someone was going to yell at her for proceeding. Then, almost mechanically, she swiped her EBT card. The beep of approval was louder than usual. Trevon watched her try to gather the groceries and balance her son at the same time. The kid had wrapped both arms around her neck like he wasn't letting go for anything. She reached for a paper bag, but her grip failed. One of the cereal boxes tumbled to the floor, spilling just enough to make her wince. Without a word, Trevon stepped forward, crouched down, and began picking up the pieces. Not rushed, not performative. Just doing it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. One of the older women nearby gasped softly. Not at the cleanup, but at what he said next. You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving. Alyssa looked down at him, eyes glassy and red-rimmed. What? He stood and handed her the bag. You don't. I saw the way you looked when they talked to you, like you were about to explain why you needed help. You don't have to explain that to anybody. There was a pause. A real one. The kind that lets weight settle into the room. Then softly she replied, It's hard when they treat you like you're stealing just for trying to feed your kid. Trevon nodded once. They don't know you, and they don't matter. The kid finally peeked at him over his mom's shoulder. Big brown eyes, thumb still in his mouth. Trevon gave him a small smile. He got a name? She adjusted her hold. Yeah, Malachi. Trevon looked at the little boy. He's lucky to have you, Alyssa. She blinked. How do you know my name? He tilted his head toward the card reader screen. It popped up when you checked out. Her smile broke through. Just barely. Well, you've got good eyes. A couple of people started clapping near the end of the aisle. Trevon hated that. Not because he didn't appreciate support, but because it made things feel like a show. And this wasn't one. He turned slightly toward them and held up a hand. Not aggressive, just enough to signal, this isn't about applause. Can someone help her to the car? He asked. She's got her hands full. A tall woman in scrubs stepped forward without hesitation. I got her. Alyssa looked at Trevon again, this time with something different. Not gratitude, not embarrassment, just quiet recognition. You're not what I expected. He raised an eyebrow. What were you expecting? I don't know. Not someone who fights back, without throwing punches. He almost laughed. You'd be surprised what fighting looks like outside the cage. Malachi tugged at her sleeve. She looked down and nodded. Yeah, baby. We're going home. She turned to leave with the nurse trailing behind, groceries in one arm, her son in the other. Trevon stood still, the cereal box still partly crushed in his hand. Someone behind him asked, Yo, what's your name? He didn't answer. Not yet. But the moment was already bigger than his name. Trevon didn't go back for his cart. He didn't even bother grabbing the protein drinks he came in for. He just walked to the end of the checkout line and stood by the wall, watching Alyssa disappear through the automatic doors with the nurse. Behind him, the manager was already on his radio, calling security, asking if the cops needed to be contacted. The answer was yes. Anytime there's a physical altercation, even if it's over in seconds, someone files a report. Trevon didn't argue. He sat down on a bench near the exit, elbows on his knees, hoodie still up. He pulled out his phone and stared at it like it might give him instructions. Notifications were popping off. Someone had already posted a short clip of the takedown, and it was spreading fast. He didn't care. A stocky officer showed up a few minutes later. He looked around, slightly out of breath, and pointed at Trevon. You the one that stopped the fight? Trevon stood up, hands visible, not because he had to, but because it made things easier. Yes, sir. I'm the one. The officer blinked, surprised by how calm he was. You hurt? No. And I didn't hurt him either. I just controlled him. The manager chimed in from behind. We've got it all on camera, and there are a bunch of cell phone videos. He didn't do anything unnecessary. The officer studied Trevon's face for a moment, then wrote something in a small notepad. Can I see your ID? Trevon handed it over. The officer looked at it and did a small double take. You're that fighter, Trevon Miles. I've seen you on TV. Trevon gave a half smile. I get that sometimes. Well, the officer said, handing the ID back. You saved that woman from something ugly. We'll file a report just to have it documented. But you're not in trouble. Trevon nodded. Thanks. As the officer walked off, one of the store clerks approached, still holding a phone. Yo, man, you really said that thing to her? About not explaining survival? Trevon looked up. Yeah. She cried when you said it. I figured. The clerk looked at him for a second, like he wanted to say more, then just nodded and walked off. That phrase, you don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving, was already making the rounds. People were quoting it, reposting the clip, pairing it with stories of their own. Stories about moms, dads, veterans, kids, anyone who'd ever been made to feel small for needing help. And still, Trevon didn't speak to the camera, didn't post a follow-up, didn't try to ride the moment. That's not why he stepped in. He walked out of the store 30 minutes later. The parking lot had thinned. The air felt cooler, quiet. No crowd now, just a few cars driving by, unaware of what had just happened inside. Near the corner of the lot, a rust-colored sedan pulled up. Alyssa was in the passenger seat, Malachi sleeping in her arms. The nurse was driving. She rolled down the window and waved. Trevon walked over. Alyssa looked at him and said, "He finally fell asleep." Trevon smiled. "Looks peaceful." "He always does after he cries. It's like he empties out." She hesitated before adding, "I didn't expect anyone to help. Not in a place like that." "You shouldn't have to expect it," he replied, "but I get it." "I felt small," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I didn't belong in there." "You belonged in there more than they did," she exhaled, like she'd been holding that breath for days. "I don't know if people like you know what it means, stepping in like that." He shook his head. "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't pretend not to see you." She nodded, this time with no tears, just understanding. Then she said, "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm around. I'm not much, but I make a mean peach cobbler." Trevon chuckled. "That's tempting." A moment passed. Then the nurse said, "We should get going." Alyssa waved, and the window rolled up. Trevon stood there, hands in his hoodie pocket, as the car pulled out of the lot. But he didn't know the story was only just beginning. Back inside Save More, the echo of what happened still lingered, even though most of the crowd had cleared. Employees stood in clusters pretending to stock shelves, but really just whispering about the guy who flipped a bully like it was nothing. The video was now making rounds on local news Facebook pages, each post a little messier than the last. Trevon didn't care for headlines, but even he had to admit, things were moving fast. He grabbed his gym bag from where he left it near the freezer section, zipped it up, and slung it over his shoulder. For a split second, he thought about heading back to grab those recovery drinks, but it felt off now, like anything ordinary would have ruined the weight of what just happened. Instead, he walked out through the side entrance, the one by the loading dock where no one was waiting with a phone in hand. He passed a few workers on smoke break, eyes wide. One of them raised a hand for a quick wave, and Trevon nodded once in return. That was enough. Back in his car, he sat for a while with the engine off, phone face down on the passenger seat. No music, no notifications, just the soft hum of traffic rolling by a few streets over. He stared through the windshield and thought about something his coach had said to him months ago after a win. "You know the hardest thing about strength? Knowing when to use it and when to sit still." Trevon never really understood that line. Until now. A buzz from his phone finally broke the silence. He ignored it. Then came another, and another. This time, a call. He checked the screen. "Coach Briggs." He answered. "Yeah." "You good?" Briggs asked without saying hello. "I'm fine. They got your name up on TMZ already. You want me to spin it or let it breathe?" Trevon sighed. "Let it breathe," I figured. "But you better be ready for reporters. You saved someone, Trey. That ain't small. I didn't do it for coverage. I know. That's why it matters." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Briggs asked, "You heading back to the gym?" "Not tonight." "All right, I'll call you tomorrow. Proud of you, kid." Trevon hung up. He started the engine but didn't put the car in gear. Instead, he thought about Alyssa, about the way her voice cracked when she said she felt small, and how many times he'd watched his own mom keep her head down in line while people behind her whispered and judged, just trying to get through the day without catching someone's eye. And Malachi, that kid was going to remember this day. Not the fight, not the fear, but the way someone stood up for his mom without expecting anything back. That mattered more than any octagon win ever could. Eventually, Trevon drove to a quiet stretch near Victory Park and parked beneath a tall sycamore tree. He got out, walked down a path toward a bench by the water, and just sat. No earbuds, no cameras, just stillness. A woman pushing a stroller walked by, gave him a cautious glance, then smiled when she recognized him. "You're that guy from the store," she said gently. Trevon nodded, unsure what to say. She didn't stop walking, just smiled again and said, "Thank you for reminding people what it looks like to care." He didn't respond, just watched as she disappeared down the path. But the real story hadn't made its way online yet. That part was still coming. By the next morning, Trevon's phone was nearly useless. Battery drained before sunrise, voicemail full, text stacked into the triple digits. Someone had posted a clear, high-resolution video of the entire encounter, start to finish. No flashy edits, no dramatic music, just raw footage. Trevon standing up to the three men, disarming the tension with calm and control, and that now famous line, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving." The clip was everywhere, Reddit, Instagram, even daytime news. A few local influencers had already tagged him by name, and his social media accounts, which had been mostly gym clips and fight promotions, were now flooded with followers asking for interviews, podcasts, brand deals. But Trevon wasn't responding to any of it. He was back at the gym, wrapping his hands before a sparring session. Same routine, same sweat, same scars. Coach Briggs walked in holding a tablet. "They want you on Good Morning America." Trevon didn't even look up. "I said I'm not doing press." "This ain't press. This is a whole country wanting to hear from you." Trevon finished taping his wrist, then stood up. "Then let the video talk." Briggs sighed and dropped the tablet onto the bench. "I get it. But this is different. You didn't just win a fight. You gave people something to hold on to." Trevon paused, looked at his coach. "You remember when I was 15 and got jumped outside Ridgeview High?" Briggs nodded. "I remember. You didn't throw a punch, took a beating but never swung. I could have fought, but I knew if I did I'd be the only one who got arrested. They'd say I was violent, dangerous. Yeah, you told me that in the ER." Trevon sat back down on the bench. "Same rule still applies. I only fight when someone needs me to." Coach didn't argue after that. Elsewhere, Alyssa had finally watched the video. A friend had sent it to her with no warning, and her first instinct was to delete it. She didn't want to relive the embarrassment. But curiosity won out. She watched the moment the cereal box hit the floor, watched Trevon kneel to help, heard her own voice cracking on camera. And when she heard what he said, that line, her hand went to her mouth. She hadn't even realized people had been recording. The comments were overwhelming. "Protect this man at all costs." She didn't ask for help. He chose to help. Every kid deserves to see men like this in real life. She didn't owe anyone a thing, and he reminded her. Alyssa didn't have a platform. No big following, but she had her story. And 2 nights later, after putting Malachi to bed, she opened her notes app and started typing. She wrote about how she hadn't always needed help, about losing her job during the second round of layoffs at a trucking company, about picking up part-time shifts at a laundromat that paid just enough to almost make rent, about the shame of pulling out a benefits card in public, about how her son asked her once if people hated him because they were poor. Then she wrote about Trevon, how he didn't lecture the bullies, didn't grandstand, just stood there, steady, like a wall between her and the people trying to break her down. She ended the post with a sentence that people would later quote almost as often as his. "Some people throw punches. Others hold the line so the rest of us can breathe." It went viral within hours. Local news outlets began covering her story too. Not the sensational version, but the one she told. The human one. And slowly the focus shifted. This wasn't about an MMA fighter taking someone down. This was about what it means to stand in the gap when the world looks away. Trevon never commented on the post, but he read it. Twice. But the most meaningful moment still hadn't happened, and it would take neither cameras nor crowd to capture it. A week passed. The noise didn't fade completely, but it got quieter. The hashtags slowed. The media requests shifted to newer stories. As always, the world moved on, but Trevon didn't. He wasn't chasing attention to begin with. His life returned to the same rhythm. Early mornings, sparring drills, solo runs through the streets of Stockton before traffic picked up. He'd had his share of big moments in the cage, none of them stuck to his chest the way this did. On a Friday afternoon, he pulled into the lot of a small community center off Charterway. He wasn't scheduled to speak or train anyone. He was just dropping off some gently used shoes and gloves, stuff the younger fighters could use. He didn't need credit. He just wanted to leave it and go. But as he stepped toward the front desk, a familiar voice caught his ear. "Trevon?" He turned. Alyssa stood near the playroom entrance, a binder under one arm and Malachi by her side, holding a juice box. She smiled as if they'd just bumped into each other at a coffee shop, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He smiled back. "Didn't expect to see you here. I volunteer on Fridays. They've got a parenting class and I help with intake. It's a little chaotic, but it pays in juice boxes and crayons." Malachi stepped forward, tugged on Trevon's pant leg. "You helped my mom." Trevon looked down. "Yeah, I guess I did." The kid nodded once, solemn like he was accepting a medal. Then he went back to sipping his juice. Alyssa laughed. "He's been practicing that for a week. Said he wanted to tell you himself." "Well," Trevon said, crouching down. "He did a good job." She looked at the bag in his hand. "Dropping stuff off?" "Yeah, got more gear than I'll ever use. Figured someone else might need it." "That's your thing, huh? Giving quietly." Trevon shrugged. "Loud doesn't always help." She nodded. "I've been thinking about what you said. About not owing anyone an explanation. I'd never heard someone say that before. Not like that." He met her eyes. "I meant it. I know. And I believe it now. Took a minute, but I do." There was a pause. Not awkward, just quiet, comfortable. Then she added, "I've been writing more lately. Little posts. Just stuff about my life. About being a mom. People have been reading them." "You're a good writer," he said. "That last one you posted? That hit hard." Her eyes lit up. "You read it?" "Yeah." "You didn't like or comment?" "I don't do all that. But I read it." She smiled wider, then looked down at Malachi, who was now chasing a dust bunny near the baseboard. "You know," she said, "I used to be so ashamed to show up in places like this. Always felt like I had to explain how I got here. But now I just walk in. No story, no apology." Trevon nodded. "That's real strength." She glanced at him. "That what you're teaching the kids you train?" He thought for a second. "Trying to. Fighting's just the surface. The discipline, the mindset. That's what changes people." They stood in silence for a few beats. Then Alyssa reached into her binder and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I wrote this for Malachi. It's kind of a letter, kind of a promise. I want him to know that surviving is a badge, not a burden." She handed it to Trevon. "You can keep it. You reminded me." He took the paper, looked at it, then folded it gently and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Malachi tugged on his mom's sleeve. "We going home now?" "Yeah, baby. We are." Trevon looked at them, this mom and her boy, not as a viral moment, but as a family finding their way forward. And in that second, without a camera, without a phone, without applause, he felt something land deep. Not victory. Peace. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes real strength doesn't come from winning. It comes from standing up, quietly, firmly, when someone needs it most.